Hi Trots fans, welcome again to the Weekly Stewards Wrap. I'm Michael Howard. I'm in the seat of Cody Winnell, who's taking a well-earned break, but importantly still joining me is HRV Chairman of Stewards, Nick Murray. Nick, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Michael.
We're going to take a look this week at the whip interpretation. There's the rule change that came into force from May 1. And Nick, just first off the bat, how are the drivers reacting to the changes in rules?
Yes, thanks, Michael. The drivers are still adjusting to the new whip rules that came into effect the 1st of May. Obviously there is some adjusting to be done and drivers are taking some time to do that. However, we're trying to assist them where possible to ensure that they do comply with the new whip rules.
Maybe we'll do a quick reminder about the changes that came into place and what the adjustments need to be.
Yeah, sure. So the main adjustments refer to Rule 156 Part 2, which doesn't allow a driver to cross their reins and use the whip freehand. That's the main focus of the new whip rules. And also Rule 156 Part 3 says a driver shall not use a whip in an unapproved manner, and there's several provisions of what is deemed to be unapproved. Under the provisions of Rule 156 Part 4 it identifies those provisions, particularly that the whip action is required to be a wrist and elbow flicking action, and that as previously interpreted by the stewards, any more than 2 occasions would be considered offence under the rules. And also stewards will take into account loose reining, where we can't see loopy shaking of the reins by the driver or lengthening of the reins so as to apply the whip with more force. And obviously one of the main contentious issues, and one that drivers are still adjusting to, is the continuous use of the whip under the provisions of Rule 156 Part 4 Part F. And the steward's interpretation is that a driver cannot use the whip on more than 10 consecutive occasions and no more than 20 in total over the final 200 metres. So the stewards have to see an obvious or identifiable pause between when the driver uses the whip, so as to not use it in a continuous manner without allowing the horse the opportunity to respond to that whip use.
Right, magic. Well, with that in mind, let's have a look at a couple of examples that have occurred over the past month. I think both are at Tabcorp Park, Melton. And Nick, do you want to just take us through the first example?
The first example is Alan McDonough, and this is on Classy Western in race 7 on the 27th of May 2016. And the stewards would determine that Mr McDonough's whip use is acceptable and does comply with the rules, particularly that Mr McDonough uses the whip whilst with a rein in his hand with a wrist and elbow flicking action, and he also doesn't use the whip in a continuous manner. You can clearly identify and see a pause between when Mr McDonough does apply the whip to the horse.
Okay, great. And then the second example that we have is an example of where an offence has occurred. Do you mind taking us through that one?
Yes, this is Steve Cleve in race 1 on the 13th of May at Melton, where Mr Cleve applies the whip to his drive Springfield Tattoo in a continuous manner and more than 10 consecutive occasions. You can see in the home straight that when using the whip, Mr Cleve doesn't break up the use of the whip, so that would be determined as a breach and penalty under the relevant rule.
And with that in mind, can you just remind us about the penalties that exist for someone who does transgress?
So the penalties remain the same as were previously in effect for breaches of the whip rules, that the first tier penalty is a $200 fine, a second offence is a $400 fine, and a third offence is a 2-week suspension of the driver's licence. And as I said, that's been the penalties for the whip rule for a significant period of time now, and that a 28-day period does apply to any offence. So if a driver does offend within a 28-day period, then it does go to that next tier of penalty.
Right, great. Thanks, Nick. So if anyone has any questions about the interpretation of the whip rule or about anything else involving the stewards, feel free to please use our email address that's been set up specifically, askthestewards@hrv.org.au. Please include your name and your phone number, and if we can't address it on the show, then the stewards will be in contact with you to make sure that you understand.